Pat Robinson, and Pat is what I usually go by. I grew up in a little farming community in eastern North Carolina near the Outer Banks. My parents, my father was from, the town's called Elizabeth City, and my father's from there. And met my mother in college. He was at Princeton and she was from Connecticut and at Vassar. And they got married after the war. When she moved to North Carolina with my dad, I don't think she'd ever been south before, and she said people were really nice to her, but she had no idea what anybody was saying, so she just nodded and said, I'm really not sure what I was agreeing to, but it turned out okay. But Dad came from a family business family. Our family's in textiles, ladies' hosiery and cotton yarn, and was in that business all his life. And when I was thinking about getting ready for this, I was thinking about the impact that had on me and got me interested in business very early in my life. I don't think Dad intended for it to be that way because he didn't think of women having careers, so he certainly wasn't grooming me. But he used to get my mother and me to help him pick out packaging designs for the ladies' hosiery. And I remember when pantyhose first came out, Dad would bring home samples, and Mother and I would try them on, and the elastic would be too tight, and we'd tell him, and then the next time he'd bring some home, and they'd fall off of us, and so it was constant, back and forth. So we were his product testers. So it made it fun, and to walk around the mill with him and meet some of the employees and that sort of thing. I really enjoyed it. I went to the hosiery convention with him and saw equipment, and so I got manufacturing, I think, in my blood then. And I remember when he had he'd bring home the paychecks. It was really a small business and had a signature stamp, and I would stamp all the paychecks. So that was my first job, even though I wasn't paid for doing it. So we grew up in this little town. I have one brother. I really have a pretty small family. My mother was an only child, and my dad was one of the youngest of three boys. And then I have a brother who's 3 years older than me. He's an ophthalmologist in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we've always gotten along beautifully. I hear about some families that have arguments and just don't get along, and my brother and I mean, we fought like when kids fight a little bit. I figure I said he learned things in Big Brother school that all you guys learn. But other than picking on me periodically, he's always been an ideal brother. And we have a lot of similar characteristics. He's a little more conservative than I am. He has two wonderful children. I've never wanted to have kids, and so I get to borrow Michelle and Andrew. They're now in their early 20s. He's in medical school, his first year of medical school, and she's going to get her PhD in English. But I've, over the years, spent time with them, and I think one of the things I love is their friends even call me Aunt Pat. So it's much better than having your own kids. So we grew up in this little town. I went to public school up through the ninth grade, and it was difficult for me because my parents focused on working hard and doing your homework and trying to get a good education. And that wasn't the ethics of my peer group. So in all honesty, both my brother and I sort of grew up feeling like we were nerds because we didn't fit in socially at all. So when my parents decided to send us off to boarding school, I was actually kind of glad to be able to get to a different environment where I'd be able to meet people that it wasn't the social side of things that I wanted, but it was more to meet people that had similar values to what I had. And so when I was 14, I went to a girls' school, a very conservative girls' school in Southern Virginia. I'll reflect back, though, before going off to Chatham, I was thinking about my summers and sharing a little bit about that. As I mentioned, we live near the Outer Banks, and have a beach house at Nag's Head. Actually, the family has about 3 different ones because as it grows, the aunts and uncles take one, and then ours was built in the 60s. But when I was growing up there, it was what I call an everybody's beach. It wasn't fancy at all. In fact, we didn't have a telephone. If my dad wanted to reach my mother when he wasn't down there, he'd call the closest hotel, and they would send a bellboy over, and he would say, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Robinson wants you to call him, so she'd drive over to the hotel and call Dad. There were no movie theaters, no television, no air conditioning, which sometimes could be a little warm. In fact, we only got air conditioning a few years ago. But it was a great way to grow up because my friends' families had cottages down there, and they're real cottages, not houses. We'd play in the ocean. It was safe. All the parents knew each other. My dad would come down for a night during the week, and then on the weekends. It was only an hour from Elizabeth City, so it was a great way to spend the summers. And then when I was 8, my parents sent me off to summer camp in the mountains. I was 8 and I went for a month. And I think that's one of the things that built some of my independence. My mother said they'd get these letters from me saying, only 22 more days and I can't wait to come home. And then she'd get another, only 18 more days and I can't wait to come home. And my mother would say, do you think this was really a good idea? And Dad went, oh yes, it builds character, she'll love it. And it took me a few summers of doing that, but I look back with some appreciation because I am pretty independent. And I think that some of that early getting out of the nest helped make that happen. And even though I wasn't thrilled at the time, I'm really, really glad that they did that for me. And so switching back to my education, Chatham was a wonderful experience for me in so many ways. It's a small school. My class was only about 60 girls. And not only did I get a great education and had teachers that really taught us how to think, but I learned healthy competition. There was no worrying about, how you looked. We looked pretty bad most of the time, although they did have dress requirements, like we had to wear tie shoes and sweaters when it was cold. In fact, I spent 6 weeks in study hall one time, not for my grades, but because I'd worn loafers to breakfast. So it was a pretty strict school. But it was a great opportunity. So in addition to the education, the traditional education, that's where I got my first taste of social responsibility. We were required to do so many hours of volunteer work a semester. And we had a variety of things we could do. We could go to an orphanage or an old folks home, help kids learn, tutor children and stuff like that. And it was really just seeing a part of who you are as a person, and got built into my fabric, for which I greatly appreciate. And also, that's the first introduction I got to politics, because we never really talked about politics at home, and certainly my friends didn't. And it wasn't a politically charged environment, but we were aware of what was going on at the time and what different candidates stood for. And the other thing at Chatham that I was made aware of is my public high school had been integrated to a certain degree, and I had black friends, but my parents were more traditionally Southern white people, and certainly I was not allowed to bring my black friends home to play. And I remember when Chatham first got integrated, it was my junior year, so my sophomore year had been all white, and my junior year is when we had some African American girls come, and the headmaster, who is pretty much of a stiff shirt, sat us down right before we were breaking up for the summer, and he told us that these girls were coming. and he gave a lecture on them being totally equal to us, and that he absolutely would not tolerate anything that indicated any kind of bias at all. And he was the first person that really got me thinking about African Americans as being equal, and doubting some of the things that I had heard growing up. And so when I look back on my Chatham experience, that's again one of the things I'm so grateful that Mr. Yardley did that for us. So I went there sophomore, junior, and senior year. My senior year, they tried a new project called the Senior, or new initiative called the Senior Project, and it was to help us start thinking about careers. So we could pick anything we wanted to do. We had one girl that, my roommate went and worked for a photographer. We had one girl who went and worked for a cabinet maker and made a table that didn't look very good. And I decided that I thought I wanted to be a laboratory technologist. Now, don't ask me why I ever thought I wanted to be a laboratory technologist, but I had to be in my bonnet. That's what I wanted to do for a career. And so I got a job in the lab of the nearby hospital and worked there for a month. But I will tell you, after about day 2, I realized I had no interest whatsoever in working in a laboratory, and I don't think I even wanted to work in a hospital. But it was actually that year that I was applying to colleges, and I had applied to Duke because they had good medical school, thinking I wanted to be a laboratory technologist. But the other reason, and the real reason that I applied to Duke, is that it was co-ed, and after 3 years at Chatham, I was ready for a co-ed school. I'd never had a date, and I wanted to go to one where it had been co-ed long enough that women were treated like real people. I graduated in 1970 from high school, and at that time was when a lot of schools were just starting to go co-ed. My brother was at Princeton, and women had only been there for a year or two, and he said it's terrible. He said the classrooms don't even have women's rooms half the time, and you're just treated like this unusual thing. And Duke had been co-ed since I think the 40s or something, and it really was great. I loved the student body and my education, but also I really felt like an equal with the men in the school, and there wasn't a difference that other people were experiencing at other schools. It was a little bit of a challenge that first year. I mentioned I hadn't had a date, and so second semester I got my first boyfriend and didn't think I needed to go to class quite as much as I had been, and so my grades plummeted. I never had the guts to tell my father why my grades had plummeted. He, to this day, thinks it's because I joined a sorority that I never went to those meetings. But he paid a fortune in tutoring, and I pulled it out. I was passing everything by the end of the semester, but the reason I declared econ as a major is because mid-semester was when we were supposed to declare our major, and that's what I was passing at the time. And also I liked econ because they always had a one-page syllabus, and I'm not an avid reader, so the way I picked courses, I do the strategic of having balance, and I took a lot of econ and numbers types courses, but I'd try to have something to balance it out, like art history or whatever. But I would not take any courses that had a 2-page syllabus, because that was entirely too much reading for me. But I made it through, and after that second semester of freshman year, my grades were just fine, and I loved my time at Duke. I think, reflecting back, the only complaint that I had about Duke was that it was not there was not a diverse student body. We had African American students, but I didn't feel a bias towards them, but there weren't enough for them to feel really a part of the community. And so while I had African American friends, they weren't a part of the community as they are in my world today, or even as it was at Chatham. So that was a disappointment, but I also think it's just, a reflection of the times. So after Duke, when came time to graduate, and they had no career counseling, much at all, for students, but less for women. They had a few bank training programs, and I can't remember what else, but not much at all in terms of career counseling. My father, who had paid for this great education, both high school and college, and had pushed me to make great grades and work hard, told me I could be a secretary, a nurse, or a librarian. And as I've explained earlier, I don't like blood and I don't like to read. So those careers did not get me too excited, but that's the only thing that he thought that women did. And a friend of mine's father told me, I think it was sometime during senior year, I was visiting her, and her father said, well, to get a good job, you need a master's. He says, it doesn't really matter what it's in, but if you get a master's, it'll make you more marketable for a job. And I went, well, I like business, so maybe I'll get a master's in business. So as with many things in my life, I think I've just kind of been lucky, because I had an eye on getting an MBA. But before I did that, I wanted to travel. My junior year in college, I had gone to Europe backpacking with two friends. And this is really hard to believe in this day and time, but we had, for $1,000, we spent, I think it was 2.5 months traveling around Europe. And we weren't staying in dumps. I mean, we were staying in these hotels that had a bathroom down the hall, but it wasn't in hostels. And we went all over Europe, and I just couldn't believe how the buildings and the architecture and the different cultures of the people I was meeting, it was just like my eyes were opened. And I truly loved it. So I decided that I wanted to work in Europe before I started a real job and a career. And since I didn't know what I was going to do anyway, it seemed like a perfect time to do it. I remember explaining it to my parents. I was born in late November, so I had started school when I was 5. And so my father had always thought that I was too young for my class. So he was always trying to get me to drop back a year. When I went to Chatham, he wanted me to repeat my freshman year. And when I went to Duke, he wanted me to repeat my senior year or something like that. And I kept saying I didn't want to do that. So I told them after I finished Duke that I was going to take that extra year after Duke. He was not thrilled with that idea, and not thrilled at all that I was going to go to Europe. On the flip side, my mother was great. I remember telling her what I wanted to do, and she said, honey, we don't quite understand you, but you seem happy, so that makes me happy. So she was always supportive in that way. And I remember when I started looking around to try to find a job in Europe. And a woman who had been my teacher in high school at Chatham, she really wasn't that much older than me, had worked in France exercising racehorses for a family over there. And I rode. And she gave me the name of a family over there, and I wrote to them to see if I could get a job exercising horses or doing something. And the family knew a woman that had a children's home. It's not quite an orphanage because the kids they had a parent, but it was an unfit parent. We had a boy whose mother had committed suicide, and he'd found her. And the father was an alcoholic. And we had 3 girls whose mother was a gypsy, and who knows who the father was. And the mother couldn't take care of the girls. So Marguerite, the woman that ran the children's home, was very devout Catholic and had found out early in life that she couldn't have children of her own. And so she determined that God's will was for her to raise his children. So it was usually the priest, but somebody in the community would tell her about these kids. And she was from a very wealthy family. She was a countess. and lived in a gorgeous chateau nearby, but we were in her father's hunting lodge, and we had about 15 kids. And so I got connected with her, and they usually take in one girl a year to help take care of the kids, help them with their homework, take them to the dentist, do that kind of thing. It was a very small, it was really kind of like a convent. A friend of Marguerite's ran it, a single woman. There was the cook, Madame Udaye, who was a peasant type of woman with a huge, huge heart. And then the stagiaire, the girl that would be there. So I had gotten this job. On job applications, I always put NA when they asked what my starting salary was, because I made $50 a month. But I had room and board and use of the little de chevaux car when I wanted that. So I had this job, and all my friends were going off to be gainfully employed and somehow had found jobs different places. And so I was taking a trip, driving around the United States before I took off. And I told my mother, but I hadn't told my father yet. So I remember calling them from the rim of the Grand Canyon, and my father exploded. And my mother said, "Call back tomorrow, dear." And I did. And my father said, "Well, you're an adult and you can do what you want, but I think it's a crazy idea. Goodbye." So it was a little icy with my leaving for France. But it was a wonderful experience for me over there. It really, from a career standpoint, was great. When I had gotten into Northwestern Business School before I left, but when I applied to business schools over there. I got into Stanford and UVA and pretty much every place that I applied, so that it helped on the resume. But it really helped me. I realized later on when I was managing people that learning to see the world through somebody else's eyes is what you've got to be able to do to be a good manager. And so when I was managing a manufacturing plant, I didn't try to wonder why they didn't think like I did. I just tried to figure out how they were thinking the way that they did. And I think that's what you get from living in a different country. So I got that. I learned the language, which was extremely helpful later on in business. And probably one of the most important things is I'd really never thought about kids, but I thought I was going to be like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music and go over there and the kids were going to love me and I was going to love them. And I decided very quickly I never wanted to have kids. It was very nice, but I liked being with the adults more. And my hat goes off to parents. I don't know how they do it because I don't have the mentality. Dogs, yes, but not kids. And I always try to be a little careful with the way I say that because I don't want to offend people. But I'm thrilled that I've had the choice and never had any pressure to have children. So I learned lots of things, applied to business schools. So I chose the Darden School for entirely the wrong reasons, but it turned out to be the best school for me. The reason I chose it was because I rode horses, and that's the center of fox hunting country. So I thought that this would be a great place where I could go fox hunting. I didn't want to go to Stanford because that was 3,000 miles from home, and I thought if I'm 3,000 miles from home, I'm going to stay here in France. Since then, of course, the Stanford ratings have taken off, but I still went to the right school. But because I was applying when I was in France, I didn't get an opportunity to do much research on the schools. So I had no idea about the rigor at Darden. When I got there, the orientation, the students are talking about how many people flunk out and how you have to work, unbelievable hours and what a boot camp it is and that sort of thing. And I didn't know anything about that, and I thought, well, this is really going to interfere with my fox hunting. I was able to ride a little bit, which was getting some exercise was very helpful. But also the good Lord was looking after me because Darden was the exact right place for me to go. It's a case method school, so I learned how to think rather than just learning a bunch of facts. And it was comprehensive, a general management school, not focused in one particular discipline. And since I had no idea what I wanted to do function-wise, it was great to get exposure to all of those disciplines. Having grown up in a family business, somebody would think that I would understand how businesses operated, but I really didn't, because our business was so small that they didn't have functional areas. Dad was pretty much the only manager there after my grandfather died, and my uncle was running one of the other plants. And I really didn't know what marketing was. I thought that marketing was logistics. So, how do you get the product to market? So the whole idea of pricing theory or advertising, as I said, the only marketing department my dad had was Mom and me, and we didn't have titles. So it was really fantastic. They required half of our grade was class participation, so we really learned how to speak up for our opinions. About 18% of the class was women, and the women, we felt that we had to work harder to prove to people that we were there, that we wanted to careers, because some people used to say, well, women go to business school because they're trying to shop for a husband, which was not the reason. I don't think there was anybody in our class that was like that. So we worked harder, but when it came to class participation, or we had study groups that we were in, the women had equal voices to the men. And the funny thing is, the only discrimination I felt when I was in business school was from the corporations that came and interviewed. And you could definitely pick up a bias there in terms of where they thought they would place women, and just the way they interacted with us. But the school itself was pretty open-minded, I felt, along those lines. So it was a great opportunity, and the study groups were great, because we learned how to work as a team, where I think sometimes competition can get so strong, and we had our share of competition, but sometimes people work against each other. And certainly in our study groups, we learned how to build on each other's strengths and help each other out. One other great thing about the Darden program, which I'm not sure whether they have now or not, is analysis and communications, A&C. We were required to take that, and it was writing papers and also making speeches. And so there was a whole semester of public speaking, which later on I found when I was out, that many people in the corporation said folks coming out of other business schools don't have those kind of skills. Between the two years of business school, I worked for the Mead Corporation here in Atlanta in the packaging division. And Mead Packaging it's Mead, not meat, packaging, makes corrugated, the thing that most people know it by it used to be 6-packs when I went there, but the 12-packs for beer and soft drink. Actually, the Atlanta paper company that was later bought by Mead invented the 6-pack. And they hired me to come in to work in the soft drink part of the business. And when they hired me, they had a bunch of little projects they wanted me to do, be kind of a gopher. And I requested that I have one thing that I could focus on, so at the end of the summer that I could feel like I'd accomplished something. So they had a new product called the cluster clip, which was this plastic, unfortunately you've probably never seen a cluster clip, but it's a plastic handle that holds two 2-liter bottles together. And they were trying to figure out what to do with it. And so I spent the summer analyzing it, trying to sell them to bottlers, which was quite an experience. And at the end of the summer, I suggested that they get rid of it, eliminate it from the product line, because it really wasn't going to have much of a future. They did not listen. They thanked me very much, listened to my presentation, and I went back to business school. And later on, you'll find the cluster clip did reappear in my life, and I was finally able to get rid of it. But I loved the time. I loved Atlanta. I'd never been to Atlanta before, and I really enjoyed working at Mead. So I went back to business school, finished up there, talked to several companies when I graduated, but in the end decided to come with Mead Packaging here in Atlanta. The first job I had when I came down was as a business planner, which is essentially a business analyst. I was working for the head of strategy and new ventures, but sort of had a dotted line to the president. It was about a $200 million division at the time, and a pretty complex division. because they had the soft drink and beer side of the business and the food side. They had a machinery business that made equipment to run the packages, and then they had a big international side of the business and dabbling in plastic packaging. So pretty complex, and Mead had the corporation had a very involved business planning process. So our business plan was probably about 3 inches thick. Now, nobody read the plan after we wrote it, but it was a laborious process. So they would have an analyst that a big part of their job was working with all the business unit heads to pull this business plan together, and then we would have quarterly reviews. It was a great opportunity again for me to learn the business at a high level. I would go with Leo, the president, and Charlie, the head of strategy, to Dayton to make the presentations of the plan. I carried the transparencies and flipped them as they're going through the presentation, and would listen to the dialogue, and it was a great way to get a bird's eye view of things. Except for the one time when my alarm clock didn't go off and I had all the transparencies and missed the flight to Dayton. I really thought that was the end of my career, but fortunately they gave me another chance. But other than that, it was a fairly uneventful time. But one of the other things I learned is the old divisional hide the bone trick, is that if you can report numbers in different ways, and if you have a product line that the corporation has questions about, you learn how to hide it in among the other products so they never see the numbers and you can do what you want. So it's an interesting time just to learn the dynamics between the corporation and the division and how communications happen. And later on, when I was at the corporate level, understanding that went on and trying to find the bones that I wanted to be able to find from a corporate perspective. So that was another side of things. And I also got my first exposure to corporate politics, which isn't always nice, and all corporations have them, so I don't feel like I'm running Mead Packaging in the ground by talking about that. But the dynamics of who gets along and who doesn't, and I felt some bias, not because I was a woman, but because I had come in as an MBA, and Mead is not the kind of company that hires a bunch of MBAs, so the staff was not used to having someone coming in at that level and getting opportunities that not everybody got. Later on, you have to prove yourself, but at the same time, it was a different kind of thing. So there was some jealousy and issues that I had to deal with there. So it was all part of a gradual learning process, I would say. People often ask me if I've had a mentor or a sponsor in my career. And Leo Benatar, who was president of the division at the time, I think I would call him maybe a little bit in between, but probably more of a sponsor, because he didn't spend that much time with me coaching me about how to deal with issues or that sort of thing. But he definitely gave me confidence and some opportunities. One of the ways that I felt that he built confidence is that he had a wonderful knack of asking me a question that he knew I didn't know the answer to, but that he would make me feel good that I would even think that he thought that I knew the answer to that question, and then I'd go get the darn answer because I didn't want to disappoint him. But he elevated my self-esteem in dealing with me, and I really appreciated that so early in my career. And then he gave me the opportunity, a lot of the opportunities in going to Dayton, and then also later on the next job that I had, I was in the business planning job for about a year, and then I was Mead Packaging's first product manager, and he sent me over to the soft drink division to work there. And I felt that one of the reasons that he was giving me opportunities is that he's Jewish and had felt biases in his career. In fact, this is really hard to believe, but the Meade Corporation used to be selective on where they went for division presidents meetings or leadership meetings, because some of the resorts at that time wouldn't allow Jews, and so Leo wasn't able to go. And so when he saw this woman come along, the first sort of potential executive woman, and saw some of the politics, because I said it wasn't because I was female. There was some of that in there too. I think he really wanted to try to help level out the playing field. And he wasn't going to save me if I messed up, but he was going to give me the opportunity to mess up or hopefully succeed. And so I was thankful for that as well. And periodically I'd get a little note from him. He's saying, I hear you just got such and such a sale or what else, and congratulations. So the product manager job I got was for the plastic bottle packaging, of which the cluster clip was in the product assortment. So I did a little updated analysis. The product had not done any better, and so we killed it, much to my joy. But there were several other good products in there. So over a 2-year period, grew that business from like a couple of $100,000 in sales to $4 million in sales. And part of that was trying to educate our sales force on how to sell the product. It was great to be able to run a little business, because I was responsible for, obviously, the product offering, for new product development, for managing the inventory, testing out the new products to make sure that they were physically viable, market tests, all the promotional materials. There was a big soft drink convention every year, and I would go to the convention and be the product expert. And then about a third of my time was spent out in the field with the sales force. And let me tell you, the bottling industry is a very conservative, old boy industry. Just old time, business. Of course, now it's not, because most of it's company owned. But at the time, they were independent bottlers, and the sales force that we had calling on them was a bunch of good old boys as well. One, just giving you a little example. I was a product specialist, and my job was to, make these calls with the salespeople. And one of the regional managers, M.J. Jobert, a self-described Catholic Cajun Jew down in New Orleans, called my boss and said, "What's this cocktail waitress doing bugging my men?" And Maurice, my boss at the time, said, "She's no cocktail waitress. She's very well educated, and she knows a heck of a lot more about that product line than you do. And if you want to make your quota, I would encourage you to have her come travel with your sales force, because she can teach them a lot." And so he gave me a try, and MJ and I ended up being great friends for the rest of my career at Meade. And even after I left packaging, I would periodically get a call from him. But it was a little rocky. It was not always easy with the customers. I remember calling on the Big Red bottler, not exactly one of the biggest customers that we had, in Louisville, Kentucky. And I go in, and this is the time when women were trying to look like men, so I'm in my little gray suit with that little tie that women used to wear. I can't believe I did that. But anyway, I was trying to look the part, and I go in, and I'm making this call on this guy, trying to get him to buy our packaging. And before he lets me get into the sales pitch, and in this one, the sales rep wasn't even with me. I can't remember why, but I was on my own. He starts tearing into me about telling me personally that I was responsible for the demise of the American family because I was taking a job away from a man. And I remember sitting there thinking, do I have to take this? And I probably shouldn't, but I did. So I just, let him get it out of his system. And then I tried to sell him the product line. I don't think that he bought any of our packaging, but at least I gave it a good try. But I think back on that time thinking, I cannot believe I put up with that. But, at that time, I just, I guess always, I've just tried to stick to business and not get into a lot of debate about being a woman. So it was a very interesting time in my career. I moved on from that. I was in that job for about 2 years, and then I got the opportunity to go back and be vice president of strategy and new ventures, which was the job I reported to when I was a business planner. The man that was in that job had been moved over into another job, and the people used to tease me and said, well, what your job really is, it's strategy and no ventures, because at the time what we were doing mainly in that department was getting rid of some bad acquisitions that we had done. So a lot of it was analyzing businesses that we were in and trying to just little product lines and deciding whether we wanted to stay in them or not, and there was a plant in there that we got rid of. In that job, probably one of the big things that happened is I had not been in that job very long, and I was working for Leo Benatar, the man that I mentioned earlier, as president, and Leo left. And I had only been in the job about a month, and I went, oh, this is not good. And it wasn't good because the vultures came out, and I say it wasn't good. I really think in the end it was, because I was given the opportunity to prove that I could do things on my own, and it wasn't this sponsor that was looking out for me. So as much as I hated to see him go, I think for my own career development it was a good thing. The new person that came in was not used to having someone in that kind of job that I had, but was very supportive of it. In fact, that was the first opportunity that I had to manage people. I had about 5 people reporting to me, the company librarian who wrote the newsletter and did all this research for people and stuff like that, and then Dr. Brody, a PhD in plastic technology or something like that, and he was the one that was developing this new packaging line that we had been plastic packaging line that we'd been working on for quite some time. In fact, I was talking a while back about hiding the bone. That was the bone that we were trying to hide because the corporation really didn't want us getting into plastic packaging, so we always put the numbers in with everything else. But anyway, I got Dr. Brody. He didn't want to work for me, and he tried all kinds of little shenanigans, and dumb stuff, and finally went to the new president after a few months and said that it was him or me, that he just couldn't work for me and wouldn't stay at packaging if he had to work for me. And to his credit, the new president, Carter Smith, said, well, Aaron, I'm sorry to hear that, but we'll accept your resignation. And so that was a vote of confidence that I certainly appreciated. But the job itself, I think I was in it for about a year and a half. It was a big title, a huge office, and I was bored out of my mind. There just wasn't much to do other than divesting of some little businesses. And one day Carter called me into the office and said he had a job that he wanted me to consider, and he started on a sales pitch of why I would want to go down to West End Atlanta and run the machinery plant. Well, he thought that this was going to be the hardest sale that he'd ever have to do, because here I was going from this gold-plated office with this super secretary and just fantastic to this terrible part of Atlanta. It's cleaned up now, but it really was you could get any kind of drug you wanted within a few blocks of the plant. And I jumped out of my chair. I was so excited because he didn't know that's what I'd always wanted to do. In fact, about 6 months earlier, I had gone to the vice president of operations for the division and told him that I wanted to work in a plant. I didn't say I wanted to be a plant manager, but that I wanted to get manufacturing experience. And wanted to know what courses should I try to go to Georgia Tech and take some engineering courses. Charlie had been to Georgia Tech, and he laughed and he said, "You don't need any engineering courses." He said, "If you want to get into manufacturing and take some courses, take psychology, because that's what manufacturing management is all about." But before I had time, I had one psychology course at Duke, but before I had time to do that, Carter had this opportunity for me. So I was thrilled, and I was 29 years old at the time, went down to West End, Atlanta, and got a little bit of a hostile welcome from the staff there. But it wasn't because I was a woman, it was because I wasn't an engineer, and I was the first person that they had that wasn't an engineer and they felt didn't understand the business. But they really didn't need somebody that knew how to manufacture or design equipment. They could do that perfectly. It really just highly, highly talented. But they didn't understand how to integrate it into the business of the company. For example, how to set priorities they would want to focus on the most interesting projects rather than the customers that were most important to the company. So what they really did need was just probably somebody that didn't understand the details of the business very well. And the reason I had wanted to go there is I'm a firm believer that I knew I wanted general management. After Darden, that my goal was to be a general manager. But I felt that to be a good general manager, a person needs multiple types of experience. So rather than come up through one avenue like finance or marketing or operations, I wanted to get a breadth of experiences. And that's really one of the reasons that I went to Meade, because other companies that I talked with when I was interviewing tended to put people more on a functional track. And because Meade didn't take many MBAs, they were pretty open to partnering with me to figure out what I wanted to do. So I was thrilled with that, but I hadn't been there very long, and we had a customer, Coca-Cola Chevy Chase, Maryland, called in one Friday afternoon, and they had this spare parts order they wanted. And it was I can't remember what the lead time was for spare parts, but it was a decent amount of time, and they wanted it like in 24 hours, and we were going to have to keep people overnight. It was a 3-shift operation, but overnight making these parts and all this stuff, and it was clear it was just for an overhaul, so they didn't, it wasn't like the machine was going to be down and they were going to be in trouble. But I said, no way, no how, we're not going to do that. And Roy Johnson, who was an engineer there, said, "Young lady, don't you remember it was only about 1.5 years ago you told me that the entire machinery division was unresponsive and insensitive to the needs of the marketplace?" Of course, that was when I was in marketing, and I had a whole different perspective now, but good old Roy had a very good memory and reminded me of that. I laughed. I can't remember whether we got the order together for them that weekend. We probably did, but it was great to be able to see the other side of the fence, as they say. It was really sad, actually. Though the plant had been the orphan of the division. And because it was, the idea of the equipment is, it's kind of like the razor and razor blade concept, where Meade designed the equipment to run the packaging that they sold. And we had so many patents that they only our packaging would run on that equipment. It would be little things in the equipment or little things in the packaging that would make them run together. And so we would put the machines out at cost, and the cost, it really didn't matter that much what it was, because the packaging was so much more lucrative. And so it had kind of just been neglected, and bad habits had built up there. So the people were talented, but there was just very little discipline. So there was so much low-hanging fruit when I got there. One thing is we didn't have any standards in the machine shop. So people, you'd look at some of the records and how many hours people would take making a part. And all we had to do was put in some standards and start posting the performance to standard, and the employees improved themselves, because they didn't want to be the low person on the totem pole as far as how they were performing. So just in doing that, putting in standards and posting, we increased the productivity of the machine shop by 30%. No equipment purchases, no nothing, just having a little bit of a measurement system in there. Something else we did was started employee teams. I remember when I got there, when I was walking around the machine shop one day, and this employee, Bradley, told me how he had some ideas of how we could improve things in the machine shop, but he said he'd recommended it to my predecessor. And my predecessor said, it's not your job to think about those things, that you just need to make parts. So he folded it up, put it in his tool chest. And he was the one, when I got there, that the first line supervisors told me I learned a new term, Georgia term, sorry, that he was just sorry, it wasn't any good. And so we got Bradley on one of those employee teams, and I can't remember what they were working on, but it was something to improve the machine shop quality or efficiency or something like that. And I remember the day that they were making a presentation to management, he came in off time, non-working time, in a coat and tie to make the presentation. And he told me he was rehearsing the night before to his wife. So you talk about is that somebody that's sorry? And so it was just amazing to be able to listen to people and give them some opportunity to see the things that could happen. Another thing that we had to do was get people in the right jobs, because we had first-line supervisors that were much better individual contributors than supervisors, and made a couple of moves like that actually worked. But the one thing that we couldn't do is we had people it was a union shop, in jobs, in some of the high-paying jobs, that didn't have the skills to do them. And we tried to work with the union to be able to declassify them and put them in a job more that they could do. And we couldn't get the union to go along with that. And it was hurting the business enough, and we tried for a long time. And I got the opportunity to do the hardest thing I've ever done in my career, and that was to shut that plant down. And it was extremely difficult, because a lot of the people that worked there, it's the only place they'd ever worked. Some of them probably didn't even have a high school education, and a lot of them really did know their jobs and did know them well. But we had to do that, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But one other thing I wanted to tell you, and it's hard to believe this was going on, and maybe it still goes on in some companies, but it flies in the face of I believe that managers have to set the right example, managers and leaders. And I heard when I got there about government jobs, and people, senior managers, vice presidents from the division, not the corporation, were sending over to machinery to get their lawnmower blade sharpened, or get a part made for something in their house. And it really didn't take us long to do it. But then we wondered, why the employees might be doing that for their own lawnmowers and their own parts. or taken something they needed. So I remember sending a memo across town to tell them we weren't going to do that anymore and getting some pushback about that. And then issuing a memo to the employees that if they wanted any kind of materials like steel or, we had different kinds of basic parts that they needed, that they could have them, but that we put in place a process where they would have to get an employee pass. So if they were taking it out of the plant, they needed to have a pass signed by their supervisor to say that it was okay. So we did that. And someone told me that the head of the steel room was still stealing. And so we sent out another notice and said, we understand that there might be people taking things out, and we're serious that we will fire you if you're caught stealing, but here's the process and how it works. And darned if we didn't, we did an employee check. People even worked that afternoon, a couple afternoons later, and this guy had a box of screws, and that he'd clearly stolen and admitted to it. So we had to fire him. And it ended the theft problem that we had. Nobody took anything else out again. And it shows you have to set an example, but it was really tragic, to be able to have to do that. But it was just that kind of discipline that they needed. And once you had it in, it was no problem. But it was pretty sad. But it was those kinds of things that had led to us shutting it down. And also, I think the president actually was tired of the bickering between machinery and the marketing people and stuff like that. So it got converted into an R&D shop, and so I was then responsible for the development of the prototype equipment. So we had a small R&D shop, product development for the packaging side, the paperboard side, and quality, and of course sourcing of the equipment. So I did that for about a year and a half. I think one of the things I learned in the shutdown process is that in shutting a facility down, it's really important to communicate with the people and to treat them fairly, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also it helps the survivors, because the survivor syndrome is a very real thing. So we had outplacement counseling for the people that were leaving, and we did something that we felt that it was important to have something to call that piece of the life of the company to a close. And so we had a lunch where we brought in the employees, invite all the employees, those that were staying and those, most of them were leaving, to invite them in and to bring their families. And we had the union president in, and the employees called it the Last Supper, which thank goodness it was really a jovial time, and the employees actually got together and made me a gift. I was big into whitewater kayaking, and they made this paddle that said, "Don't get caught up creek without a paddle," and then thanks from the guys in the machine shop. And they gave it to me, and then they gave me an employee pass, so it was legal taking it out of the plant. But to shut a plant down and have people feel that way about it is in my book, the only way to do it. But people say I'm a Pollyanna, and I'm sure that I am. So I had my new job of sourcing, and we moved on from that. But I think we were all feeling the grief of that. When I'll pause for a minute. I've been talking about my career, and before I talk more about that, I'll pause a little bit and talk about the personal side of what was going on then. The people often ask about work-life balance. I was able to be involved in the community. At the time, I was very interested in the ballet, and did a lot of work. They had a young professionals group called the Ballet Associates. We had meeting, things to get together and learn about the ballet. But our big event every year was putting on a fundraiser, an auction, that I think I worked on it about 4 years. The last year we cleared $50,000, which is a pretty good thing considering we had to do all the work ourselves in terms of getting the donations and that sort of thing. But it was a great group, and I met a lot of people that are still my friends today working on that. I was big into running. I ran in the Peachtree, well, jogging, not running, in the Peachtree Road Race. And then I discovered whitewater kayaking. And after I took my first course, it was at Georgia Tech actually, in their athletics department. When I took my first course in kayaking, I paddled every weekend for a year except Christmas. And that means like New Year's in the ice. But I was very, very much addicted to kayaking, and it was a great sport. Mainly went up in North Georgia. The Ocoee River is near here, and I was up there a lot. But also there's the Atlanta Whitewater Club, and also went out west, paddled the main fork of the Salmon, and then the Colorado River, which was the biggest one that I have done. And flipped in lava, which is the biggest rapid on the biggest river, but fortunately, again, luck would have it, I rolled up. But it was a exhilarating experience. And one of the things that I learned in kayaking actually helped me in management, and I used to try to share it with employees, and that is in paddling, if you really want to have control over where you're going in a river, you have to go faster than the water so you can actually steer where you're going to go, because otherwise the water is going to take you where it wants to take you, and often it is not where you want to go. And it's really the same in business, that if you sit back and wait to see what's going to happen, it may not be what you want to have happen. So the whole idea of planning and contingency planning and looking out around you for the rocks that are coming up is a very, very wise thing to do. And also the exhilarating feeling you have at the end of a nasty rapid is just like at the end of a nasty meeting with an unhappy customer or something like that. It's not fun when you're going through it. But once you get through it, that sense of accomplishment really is pretty darn great. So even my paddling experiences helped me in business. And the other thing it did is that's where I met the man that I ended up marrying. I never really intended to get married. My parents, in all honesty, they loved each other a lot, but they fought a lot. And my mother had to take a subservient position in that relationship. And I didn't want to have the life that she had. So I had just had it in my mind that I would never get married. But I met this man who was, is a great paddler. So I said I perfected his rescue skills. And he was totally the kind of person no one, certainly not my parents, and not I, would expect me to end up with, because he was a blue-collar guy. He was a truck driver for Roadway Express. And it wasn't a professional relationship. It started with the fun of paddling, and he's one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Knows a lot about astronomy and politics and science and all kinds of things, and poor guy just was not blessed like I was in terms of what family he was born into, and his parents kept telling him he would amount to nothing, and he was living up to that. So falsely, I believed that I could save him by believing in him and helping him get an education and that sort of thing. My friends did say that I became much more interesting after I started dating him because I was kind of boring up until then. So we dated for 5 years and had just decided to get married when, circling back to my career, I got the opportunity to move to Wisconsin to be president of Gilbert Paper, which was a division of the Mead Corporation. Their smallest division, but extremely profitable. I'll also pause to explain a little bit to you about Mead's high potential program that they have, because people often ask, do you think there's a glass ceiling for women? And at Mead, I really didn't feel a glass ceiling in terms of opportunity. I felt it in terms of environment, some of the things that I was telling you about, in some of the biases that I felt from customers or employees. But in terms of opportunity, I was certainly given the opportunity to have challenges. And I think the reason for that is Mead has a program called High Potential where managers pick out, the division presidents pick out the people that they think have the potential to really rise up through the ranks. And it's really managed quite well, I say was, and looking at giving people different experiences. So at this time I didn't even know the HIPO system. I didn't find out about it till I was a president. But I think that is the reason I was sort of being watched by Dayton and being looked at for other opportunities. So this one to run Gilbert came up, and it was I started November 1st. And in Wisconsin, I'd never lived further north than Charlottesville, Virginia. I didn't know where Wisconsin was, I'm embarrassed to say. And I remember calling my parents and my mother saying, "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Where is Wisconsin anyway?" And so we all got out a map to figure out where I was going. I had spent the weekend with some friends down in Florida, and they put me on the plane to fly up to Wisconsin to start my job, and I still had on shorts, but I had this long raincoat over it. And I get up there, and I think they'd had their first snow. I was freezing to death. And this woman sitting next to me on the plane had been snowed out, so I had to take the bus from Milwaukee up to Menasha, where the plant was. And this woman sitting next to me on the bus, I'll never forget, she said, I'm trying to hide my shorts. And I told her I was going up to work at Gilbert Paper. And she said, "Oh, I hear they have a new president. I wonder what he's like." And I said, "Oh, I hear it's really a great person." So I continued on my way and went in the next morning to my job at Gilbert. What Gilbert does is make uncoded writing, text, and cover papers. So letterhead paper, business cards, the non-shiny paper used in annual reports, brochures, those sorts of things. Highly profitable. Gilbert makes uncoded writing, text, and cover papers, so stationery, business cards, the non-shiny paper used in annual reports, brochures, those sorts of things is the type of paper they make. But they also make, at one time made currency paper, U.S. currency. Crane dominates that now. Social Security paper, lottery paper. They call it security paper because we put little fibers and they call them planchettes, dots in it, so it can't be counterfeited. So a wide variety, but quite profitable. It was a cash cow for the corporation. I say it was a cash cow that had been milked because the corporation had not invested in new equipment. We had parts from every Mead mill. They would get something new and we would scavenge it and have it up at Gilbert. But we sold. Most paper sells by the ton. That's the pricing. We sold by the pound, and actually had some paper we sold by the sheet. So it was considerably more profitable. And when you look on a return on investment, it was really profitable. But it was getting to the point, several things were going on. One is that people were, there was more competition coming in, and we'd gotten to the point where we really did need to invest in the business. So some of the margins were starting to come down. It was about a $70 million business, 400 employees, all located right up there in Wisconsin, which I knew how to find after I finally got up there. They had just come off a very difficult labor negotiation. Actually, they'd had a strike. And it was a difficult time to come in because the employees were pretty angry. But we were able to get over that. We worked on several things while I was there. One was taking the plant recycled. And that was a very difficult thing to do because this is paper, again, very premium. When you think that the competitor that most people know is Crane. So it's Crane and Strathmore type quality. We just didn't spend as much money on advertising and had more commercial customers. We didn't have regular consumer market. But that kind of premium paper, folks thought of recycled as being dirty. But at the same time, there was a big recycling push, and a lot of the corporations, McDonald's, people like that, wanted to have a recycled paper. So we had to work very hard on how to make a good recycled sheet, which we were able to do in the end. It took us about a year to be able to do it, but you wouldn't be able to tell the difference in a virgin sheet and a recycled sheet by the time we were finished. The other thing we did is create a new product line. Paper is a fashion business just like the fashion industry, and so graphic designers are always looking for something new and different. So we decided to take a new approach to how we were going to go about coming up with a new kind of paper. We hired 3 graphic designers to help us design the paper because we figured who else would know what graphic designers want than graphic designers? But we told them on the front end that we would not hire any of them to do any of the promotional materials, that they would help us pick the graphic designer that would do the promotional materials, but we would pay them and pay them well for their work in helping us do that. So we had people one from Florida, one from Oregon, and one from, I think, Chicago, help us, very different styles, help us design the new sheet. And in doing that, it was really a fascinating process. We got samples of all the competitive sheets, and we got the manufacturing people to give us samples of all the mistakes that they had made, because some of the best products have come from mistakes. And then we got a bunch of handmade papers from Japan, and had that for them to look at. And they came up with a design. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but in the paper manufacturing process, the wire is a piece of it, and the wire can actually put an imprint in the paper, and that's how watermarks are made. Hopefully you know what a watermark is. It's sort of a dying thing, but we made a lot of private watermarks too. So there was we started experimenting with different kinds of wires to be able to put a pattern in the paper, and came up with one, and it was an involved system of different, they kind of look like very natural squares, a grid pattern. And then we had a smooth sheet that went with it, and we had a whole color system that went with it. But the greatest story of that whole manufacturing process is we're sitting in the conference room with the 3 designers and the head of the plant out there. And one of the designers is describing the paper, and he says it needs to be more sensual. And the head paper maker said, I know about porosity, I know about stiffness, I know about color, but I don't know about sensuality in paper. So we had to work back and forth a lot to be able to get some specifics around what was going to make that sheet more sensual. But we came up with a great product line. They helped us pick a cutting edge graphic designer to do the promotional work for the sheet. And I figured out that it must be a great promotion because I couldn't understand it, and that's usually how it goes with graphic designers. Ended up having a great relationship with him. He worked for us for many years, helping promote the sheet. Had a great introduction of it, and it really is one of the classic new product line introductions in that side of the business. So that was another accomplishment that we had when we were there. One of the learnings that I had when I was there, however, is more on the unfortunate side, and that is that it's very important for managers to know when to pull the plug on certain employees that just really aren't cutting the mustard. And Gilbert had kind of been a graveyard for managers that were nice people but not that good. When the corporation didn't want to fire them, they sent them up to Gilbert. So I had a couple of people working for me that were not keeping up. And I realized I kept postponing doing something about it. And certainly I had the prerogative. I wasn't forced to keep them. But they'd been around so long, and I thought, well, we can limp along without them, with them. But what really was the learning for me was when the one person I'm thinking about was the VP of Marketing and Sales. We had promoted a woman from the sales force to be a sales manager who really had the potential to do that, but he couldn't give her any leadership or guidance, and so she failed in that job. And she went back to being a salesperson. But I always regretted trying to save one person. I really risked the career. Well, I damaged the career of one person and risked the career of other people. So I've heard it said many times, but that was my learning experience, or first learning experience. I learned it other times, is to go ahead and make the change when you need to make the change with people. While I was at Gilbert, I'd been there for several years. The corporation, the current chairman, had announced his retirement, and the person that was the president was going to rise to be the chairman. And he wanted to really think about how he wanted the corporation to be in his tenure, and brought in several leaders from around the corporation, some division presidents and some corporate staff people, and put together a small, relatively small, I think there were about 6 or 8 of us, task force to study other corporations, what their learning experiences, what we could learn from them, what they'd done right, what they'd done wrong, and look at different organizational styles, whether to be centralized or decentralized. It was really a fascinating process to go out and look at other companies and learn from them. One of the things which goes back to what I was just talking to you about is the number one answer we would get whenever we asked a corporate, a CEO, our chairman, what is your advice? What's the one thing that you wish you'd done differently? And they said pulling the plug on somebody that wasn't a fit. That was a little bit of consolation, but not a whole heck of a lot. But I think it's a problem that all managers have. I always think I can save people, but so that was an interesting thing to hear from them. But after quite a bit of study, we decided to have a decentralized operating company, which was pretty much what we'd had, but to clarify some roles and responsibilities more. So Meade had 10 divisions at the time, and what we wanted to do was have the corporate center only take care of those things where there was lumpy demand, like the engineering for a new paper mill. So it's something that not every division needs. It really needs to be a centralized skill. Where there's scale economies, so things like IT, where you can really have the benefit, or specialized skills that are needed. So skill, scale, and lumpy demand. And everything else we wanted to push out to the divisions or get rid of. So the next phase of this process was to go through a right sizing, which I think that's sort of an old term now, but it was in vogue then. And Steve picked 2 people to run the right sizing initiative. Myself, because he wanted a division president, something, so it would be division pushed, and then the head of IT for the corporation to have that staff balance. I was still president of Gilbert at the time, so I spent about 3 days a week in Dayton and 2 days a week in Menasha. That was a little bit of a challenge, but the division was running pretty well by then, and I had a good team. And so we looked at each, it was a right-sizing initiative, and we looked at each function. It sounds like it couldn't be done. McKinsey was helping us with it, but we got each department to attach the time that they devoted to all the different initiatives that they did, because a lot of them were, some things crossed across departments, and we were able to taking their budget, put a value on the time of each of these activities. So it was really like an activity-based analysis. And then we would have representative from the divisions come in and decide if they were willing to pay for that activity. Because it used to be we would just get charged a corporate fee and we didn't have any say about it. And the new CEO was tired of people complaining, and so he said, you really have to be able to buy the service. So there was a real sales process that went on. There was also a lot of discovery, because even the IT, the head of IT for the corporation didn't know what some of these departments did. I didn't even know a bunch of them existed being out in the division. So it was a great educational time for all of us, because these division representatives had to come in and learn what these people did and decide whether they wanted to pay for them. There were a few things that the corporation said that they would pay for, but not many. And so as a result of that, we cut out about 20% of the corporate overhead. We pushed a lot of activities out into the divisions. There were a few activities that we actually brought up from the divisions up into to corporate, but it got things cleaned up a lot and got us leaner. And through that took about a little under a year. And after we had that done was when Steve, the new chairman, decided that he wanted to engineer some of the leadership of the company, and gave me the opportunity to run the consumer products business for me, needs, school, and office products. It's about a $550 million. Nope, I skipped a job. Let's see.
Here.
Let's go back to, I forgot about the strategy job. So let's stop. What was the last part of the right sizing? So that lasted about a year.
Right.
Okay. Steve decided to do some reorganizing in the corporation, and offered me the job of moving to Dayton and becoming vice president of corporate strategy, reporting to him. I wasn't sure I wanted to go into a staff role again, because that's where I had been so bored. But clearly it was going to be a totally different kind of experience, and it was. And so I packed my bags and moved to Dayton. Along the way, just a quick snippet on the personal side, I got married going into Wisconsin and divorced going out of Wisconsin. And that had nothing to do with the move. The move was really more the catalyst. And I said it was 1/3 my fault, 1/3 his fault, and 1/3, and probably even more than that, our differences. So that was sort of the quick marriage that I had. So I packed up the dog and moved to Dayton, Ohio, which before, quite a lot earlier in my career, when I was running the machinery division, I had been offered a job in Dayton that I really didn't think I was a fit for, so I had turned it down and said that I would never, it wasn't because of Dayton, but the idea of living in Dayton was not something I looked forward to. But let me tell you, after Wisconsin, I was so excited to get halfway home and see a Kroger's store that it didn't look so bad after all. And it was a great place to live. The people are the people are wonderful in Wisconsin as well. The work ethic up there is amazing. So I moved to Dayton, and there were several major initiatives we were working on at the time. The first was to try to figure out what the future of the paper industry was going to look like. We hired McKinsey, and I had worked with McKinsey when I was at Mead Packaging. They've done a lot of work with the corporation, and it's like getting a second MBA. I'm a big supporter of theirs. They just cost too much, but it's really an amazing strategy team. And they helped us look at the future of the paper industry, and whether you had to be big to really succeed and be profitable, which meant we would have to merge with somebody if we were going to do that. And what we determined after quite a lot of work is that you have to be number one or number two in your segment of the industry, but you don't have to be in a bunch of different segments, which I think a lot of people in the industry thought that you had to do. And we actually also learned in looking at return on investment and decided that paper makers don't like to make money because corporations, just when a segment starts to be profitable, somebody in the segment invests in a new paper machine. So there's almost always overcapacity in the industry. So you've got to be a low-cost provider and really number one or number two in the segment. The other thing that we determined is that you we're having to pause because there's something. The other thing that we learned is that paper is not going away. My good old Gilbert has been impacted, and we saw that coming because people do fax so much now that private watermarks, who cares, and so much is done digitally. But it's amazing that print button that everybody hits. Now I would imagine that the paper industry is being impacted, but we did not see that at the time as being a big threat to the industry. It's sort of like when cell phones came on, people kept their landlines. Of course, now they're getting rid of their landlines. But at least in the near-term horizon, it looked pretty good for paper. So we did work on deciding which segments of the industry we wanted to be in rather than merging with another company. Mead has since merged with Westvaco, but at the time we decided that that's not what we needed to do. But the other thing that was fascinating that we worked on was the information retrieval business. I guess a lot of people don't know that Mead used to own LexisNexis. And the way we got it is kind of an interesting story. The person that invented or created LexisNexis lived in Dayton, Ohio, and was the backdoor neighbor of the chairman of the corporation many years, before I was in the corporation, and was looking for investment capital for this new little technology business he developed. And so Mead helped invest in I have no idea how they justified it to the board of directors, but anyway, Mead invested in it. And it grew and what turned out to be very successful. But by the time I was in charge of strategy and Steve was chair, we were beginning to question whether we were the right parent for the business. And I think the example that I use that helped convince me that we were not the right parent is at the time, LexisNexis, their growth strategy was to acquire a lot of small businesses that had access to information. So data ownership was very important. And there was a little company out in San Francisco, I think it was like a $10 million company. It was very small. And I, as head of corporate strategy, had to make the preliminary recommendations on it. So I flew out there with the LexisNexis people to look at this business. And we get all the information, and I bring it back to Dayton, and we're all sitting around trying to figure out, does this fit, and not totally trusting the management of the division as to, what boner they had, and what's going on there. So we were really struggling. Should we buy this little $10 million business? At the same time, Warren Paper came along, which was the largest coated paper producer in the United States, maybe the world, I can't quite remember, but very, very large, and they were coming on the market. So we decided in this thrust to focus on certain segments. Coated paper was one of the ones we wanted to focus on. So we all piled in the corporate jet. It was the head of the CFO and the chairman and the head of operations for the corporation and myself and somebody else, the chief legal guy. And we fly up to Maine to look at their Maine mill. And on the flight up, we're clearing all the questions we want to ask them. We spend a half a day touring the plants and breaking in these groups. We're on the plane back from Maine. By the time the plane landed in Dayton, we knew how we were going to consolidate product lines, what machines we were going to shut down, how we were going to do it, and back of the envelope, how much we'd be willing to pay for it. And so to think about, okay, and it was $1.3 billion that was what it went for. I think we offered 1.1. So we could decide on a $1.1 billion paper business, but we couldn't decide on a $10 million technology business, and that convinced me. We had no business being in the technology business unless we had an entirely different corporate center, and that we needed that business to have the parent that really knew how to manage it, to pick the people that were going to be in it, to pick the acquisitions and that sort of thing. Steve was a little more hesitant on that decision, so it took him a little while, but not too long. And one morning, Sunday morning, I'm sitting there reading the newspaper, drinking my coffee, and the phone rings, and it's Steve, the chairman. And he said, I was at the opera last night, and I got thinking about LexisNexis. Obviously, he got dragged to the opera. And could you come over? He said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm reading the paper, about to go to church, but I don't have to go. And he said, well, could you come over after church and we want to have a discussion about LexisNexis. So he had the CFO and the chief counsel and myself in his kitchen on Sunday afternoon, and he pulls out this opera program, and he'd written all these thoughts that he'd been hearing from all of us over the past couple of months, and it was just, you talk about the tipping point, that opera was Steve's tipping point, and he said, we really just need to sell LexisNexis. So we spent the next several months interviewing investment banks, which was fascinating. We had an investment bank that we had worked with, but we said if we're going to do a deal this big, we really ought to make sure that we have the right one. And I don't think these investment banks are used to having people interview them and asking those kind of questions. They sort of just bet on the business and go with them. But we hopped on the plane and went up there and interviewed all these investment banks to really pick the one that we felt could do the best job in selling the business for us. We chose Goldman Sachs to help us with that. And then simultaneously, I worked with McKinsey and my team. That I had a small staff that worked for me on trying to value LexisNexis and figure out who the likely customers, purchasers would be for the business. And one could say that the investment banks ought to do that, but we felt that it was really important for us to have our own perspective on that. And I have to say, in the end, I really believe that work that we did helped us maximize the return that we got for that business. We also looked at whether we ought to just spin it off to the shareholders, just do a split and spin it off. But the problem is it really did need some scale for investment down the pike, and so it needed to be acquired by somebody. So we went through that whole process and sold off LexisNexis, which was a fascinating process for me. And then it was fascinating to see the new management come in. Reed Elsevier bought it, and they had bought other companies before, and they had a very good system for meeting with employees, telling them what the business was going to be like, and just they had a routine of how you start up into a business, which was helpful for me later on when I did an acquisition. Learned some things on what to do, and from some acquisitions we hadn't been so successful in what not to do when you're doing an acquisition. In that, there were a few other things. We worked on a couple of acquisitions when I was in that job, and a divestiture of one of our smaller plants that wasn't a good fit for the corporation. But one of the other learning experiences I had in that job was working with the board of directors, because I think I'd made a presentation once to the board for just a few minutes, but I really didn't know them, and I didn't know how the corporate leadership interacts with a board. And it was fascinating to me to see how that process works, and it's been helpful for me later on now that I serve on the board of a public company. One of the things is learning how much information to give them, and to give it to them in a digestible way so that they can provide appropriate governance. So we wanted to really get it down to the essential information and not use so much paper lingo that these people from other industries wouldn't understand. So we didn't want to give them too much information, but we also didn't want to give them too little information. And we wanted to give them enough information in the pre-readings so that when we had a presentation to them, we had time for them to ask questions and engage with us. And for an acquisition, we never would go in and ask for the acquisition in the first meeting. We would have a meeting where we would educate them about the company and why we were interested, and sort of laying the groundwork, and then maybe the next meeting come back, or a future meeting come back to them. And of course it depended on the size of the acquisition. But being a director now, I can certainly appreciate that, not getting surprised by anything. And I think Meade has been highly respected for how they deal with their board. My favorite board story is Barbara Jordan. She served on our board and was one of my heroes. And when the paper study I was talking about earlier, the future of the paper industry, I was presenting that to the board at their annual strategy retreat. And it was a pretty lengthy presentation. I think it was a couple of hours, because there was a lot of information in it. So I went through the whole presentation and answered their questions and whatever. And that night at dinner, we had a hunting lodge down in South Georgia, so it was down in a relaxed environment. But before dinner, I'm talking to Barbara, and she said, "Pat, I was so proud of you in that presentation." And I said, "Well, thank you, Barbara, but you're not supposed to be my advocate. You're supposed to be my judge, as a director." And she said, "I will always be your advocate." And I will remember that for the rest of my life. And boy, I cried the day that I heard that she had died. But she was a wonderful advocate, but she was a great judge. She was very helpful as a board member, because she would ask the questions that other people wouldn't want to ask, sort of what some business people might say, the dummy question, and it wasn't dumb at all. And she was tough. I mean, she was tough on unions. I thought she would have been a strong supporter of them, and she was a strong supporter for dealing with them fairly, but not just bending over backwards. She was very strong on environmental issues, making sure that we had sound practices there, and really had the support of the other board members, even the very conservative ones, because they respected her judgment and opinions and questions. So it was that's one of my favorite memories from that job, was getting to know Barbara and some of the other board members. It was a very strong board. After I'd been in that job for about a year and a half, Steve did another shuffle of management, or made at least a few moves, and offered me the opportunity to run the consumer products business, Mead School and Office Products, which is, most people have heard of the Trapper Keeper, because there was one time in the 80s when there was one Trapper Keeper sold for every 2 children in America. So in terms of distribution and brand, it was a great product. We had a lot of others, but not that were very, very successful, but I don't think any of them reached Trapper's penetration. But it was a very successful business, had the school supplies, notebooks, backpacks, day planners, art papers for children. That's where the strength was. More recently, they had gotten into office products, but again, the premium side of office products. So again, day planners, envelopes, legal pads. Well, there were more commodities, but office products sold through the same channels. So Target, Walmart, Kmart, Walgreens, Kroger's, that were our primary customers. It's a fairly large business, $500 million when I started there, but we very quickly completed an acquisition of our Canadian counterpart, which added another $50 million. We had about 3,000 employees in 8 plants, a maquiladora in Mexico, and did a lot of offshore sourcing for the sewn products. So the day planners and portfolios and those sorts of things that had a high labor sewing content were done offshore. School and office products had been very successful for a long time, and yet it was risk averse to getting into new things. There was a fair amount of complacency there. And also a challenge that I had going into school and office was that the fellow that was the vice president of marketing and sales was very comfortable with my predecessor, who was now my boss, and thought he deserved my job. So he was trying to undermine me from the very beginning. And the fellow that was head of sales was joining him in that because he wanted to be head of sales and marketing. So I was sort of messing up the plan for both of those fellows. And they were making my life very miserable and making it hard for me to be able to institute change. I did a little bit of changing of the structure, but not getting rid of anybody, and brought in some fresh blood. But I learned something through all of that, and that is that to be able to implement change, you have to get rid of the real resistors. And if you bring in just 1 or 2 people that's fresh blood, they can't, I mean, this sounds like common sense at the time, I don't know why I didn't realize it, but they really can't make enough change happen. Having turned people around in the machinery division, I really believe, and repositioned people, I really believed I could convert these 2 guys. And where I had other people telling me to get rid of them, I kept thinking I could change them, and also I was scared to death that I needed them because I came from outside the industry. I didn't know any of the buyers, any of the people at the high level at our customers, and really felt beholden to them. So I spent time trying to get to know those customers so I wasn't dependent on those two fellas. But I waited way too long. Just like those people we had interviewed said, I waited way too long to make that change. I eventually did, and life was once I got rid of the head of I got the head of marketing and sales to take early retirement, and once he was gone, the other fella got right into place and was fine. He was just getting some bad coaching, I think. But that was one of the big challenges I had there. The other challenge I had was trying to get the division to take risks, because they were getting great incentives for not making any mistakes. So they didn't want to try to get too far off the mark, because they didn't want to basically endanger their incentive and make a mistake and endanger their incentive. So we spent some time trying to figure out how to grow the business. Because it was profitable, I had a mandate from the corporation to grow. So I did what books talk about now, about having a big, hairy goal. I set a goal that we were, and it worked, that we were going to double the size of the division in 5 years. So we were $500 million at the time. I was pretty lucky because we had the first $50 million pretty quickly coming on, because I already started working on that acquisition. And so we started to look where we could find additional growth. And we looked at a lot of different industries, and we looked at more international expansion. We bought Canada. We looked at buying our counterpart in Buenos Aires, because that would be good because it's counter-seasonal to ours. And I think we looked at Brazil and other places, France, but we couldn't come up with one that would work, and it really wouldn't give us that much additional volume. But what we determined was a great fit was computer accessories. So not to get into the technology side of accessories, but get into the things the kinds of products that we knew the design side. So carriers for laptops. iPhones didn't exist at the time, but those kinds of carriers would have been there. Things to hold CDs and whatever. So we made an acquisition of it, and that was going to be a lot of small acquisitions. There's some big people in that industry, and we began to talk to them as well. But it had taken us a while to figure out where we wanted to grow, and we're starting to work on those kinds of acquisitions. About at the time, I was having some difficulty selling the corporation on that kind of growth. They were more oriented towards paper-based products. So that was a bit of a push-pull for me. And so we made some progress in there, but not nearly as much as I think we could have if I had stayed. About that time, though, I was really getting kind of worn out with the corporate life. The people in Dayton are wonderful, but I wasn't overly happy there. I really wanted to get back to Atlanta. And in all honesty, I wanted to have more meaning in my life, because by the time I'd gotten to that stage of the business, there was not the opportunity to be able to do community work, because I traveled a lot when I was at Gilbert and School and Office Product. I was gone probably a third of the time, a third to a half, being out with customers or at the plants. And so I for all those reasons, I was ready to leave, and I think getting a little bored. The amazing thing is I'd sort of accomplished what I'd set out as a professional goal, because I really didn't want to be head of the corporation, and it's a good thing because the guys that were there were going to be there for a while. But really, I'd sort of checked that box. So I decided to leave, and I decided it early in the year, but it's a school business, so I didn't want to leave and I didn't want to tell the corporation until we'd gotten through the school year, which August is about the time when the school supply selling. It's a highly, highly seasonal business, and when that's through. So it's kind of funny when they say that when women are having babies, they start cleaning up the house and nesting or something like that. So I started nesting at school and offices. I took care of some things, a few more employees that I should have dealt with sooner, and just got some projects, some things done that I'd let sit around, but I didn't want to leave those for somebody else to have to clean up or people to say I'd left a mess. So I worked on some of that. But also, I had a great desire to travel. I had, I traveled a lot for work, but I didn't have much time to travel on my own, vacation kind of travel. And I like to go to remote places that aren't really touristy. So I started planning my travel plans, and I thought, well, I will leave the corporation, travel for 2 months, and then move back to Atlanta and look for a job. Well, actually, my first harebrained idea was that I was going to find a job in Atlanta, resign from the corporation, and travel for 2 months, and then move to, start my new job. And somebody said, "You are stupid if you think anybody is, going to hire you, and you don't know what you want to do anyway." To do it in that order. So why don't you just take the time off and then come to Atlanta once you're ready. And so I decided to do that, and 2 months grew to 4 months, grew to 6 months, and so I rounded it out to a year, and traveled all over. Well, I did a variety of things. I traveled to Australia and New Zealand. That's not that remote, but it was fascinating, or fun, I must say. And then I went to Asia for about 3 months, and went to Burma and Bhutan, and trekked in Nepal, spent a lot of time in India, a whole part of the world, a lot of places, not Burma and Bhutan, but India, Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia. I had been to, when I was with school and office, and we were doing outsourcing, because I had a manager that was responsible for that, but about every 2 years I would try to go over with him and visit, twice I went with him and visited some of our factories to make sure I was confident that I could represent to our board that we were having ethical standards in the plants, and my motto is we do not ever want to be on anything that's on 60 Minutes. We want to be proud of, and we were. The fellow that ran sourcing was very, very strict on that sort of thing. But I also wanted to know how he found new factories, and so I made a couple of trips with him like that, and saw places I was dying to go back to. So this was an opportunity to. I sort of had a bucket list of all these places that I wanted to go. But I also did some traveling with my niece and nephew. They were 12 and 15 at the time, and was able to take them on some trips. And that is still paying off. There was a bonding there that will last forever. I spent some time with my parents. And then I did a lot educationally. I had joined an organization called Young Presidents, YPO, when I was in Wisconsin, when I was a young president. But I never had the time to take much advantage of their educational opportunities. In fact, I remember going to one YPO conference and spending the whole conference in my hotel room working on a presentation for an acquisition we were going to do, or something for the corporation, but I never got to hear any of the speakers because I was too busy working. So I used that time also to take advantage of YPO, but also some other educational opportunities. So it was sort of piecing together some time that was very valuable, and I don't think many people do, and I feel really blessed to be able to have done that. So I moved back to Atlanta, actually into my old house. I had rented it. I'd been gone for 10 years, 11 years, and I had multiple rentals, but when I left, I thought I was going to go to Gilbert, be there a couple of years, leave the corporation, and move back. And it didn't quite work out that way, but I'm glad I held on to the house. So I moved back into the old house and started doing some consulting in the strategy arena mainly for small businesses, and was looking. I had this vision of wanting to find a business that I could run, a medium-sized business, like 15 to 50 million, something in that range, to be able to run and get a piece of equity. But I was having trouble finding a business that really made me want to jump out of bed in the morning, and realize that most of my skills were in areas that, I don't know how to say this right, but not people that I would want to spend the rest of my life working with, or tasks I wanted to work in, because it had been a fairly risk-averse, conservative business that I had been in. So instead, I started working with an internet startup called TruckBay that was started by a woman who is a very successful entrepreneur, great at putting together deals and creating a product, and is my opposite in terms of risk. And a woman who's a brilliant PhD and very talented, but had not run a business. So I came in as the third leg with sort of the practical manager, leader experience. And the three of us were leading TruckBay. And what TruckBay does, it's a portal for the trucking industry. So there were a lot of companies doing this at the time, to be portals for reverse auctions and product sales and education, to do a lot of different things. And I was part of that leadership team. And some of the guys in the industry called it Truck Babes instead of Truck Bay, because it was these three women running this business. It was really fascinating. But unfortunately, after about 2 years, it, like many internet companies, went belly up. But it gave me an introduction to even though trucking is as boring as paper, it's the excitement of the internet component of it was totally different, and it was a great experience. And then I got a call from a company a woman in Chicago, who has a very successful high-end interiors business, who never really had any management processes at all. $80 million business, usually very successful, but no job descriptions, pay scales, budgets, strategic plan, review processes, any of that kind of thing. And she had determined that she needed a president for her company, and the graphic designer that worked with us at Gilbert recommended she call me, because he knew that I had left me a while back. So I told her that I would come work for her on a consulting basis. I didn't want to work for her full time, because I knew what that might be like. But I went up, and actually it ended up being 2 years, though, that I did work for her. And actually being a consultant worked better, because she knew I could walk away. And I liked working in smaller businesses after being in a big corporation. It's just a whole different feel. And through working at Truck Bay and with Holly, I determined a better definition for who I am, and that is to be the practical partner for the creative brain. Because I am not naturally creative like the real creative entrepreneurs are, and I don't have the risk profile, but I have a huge appreciation for people that do. And I have the manager-leader skills that they often don't have. And so it really makes for a great team. And it's been very helpful. That self-awareness has been very helpful because I was having some identity issues trying to think about doing things that just weren't a fit for me. And it's tough. I mean, it's tough to, you kind of think when you've been successful you can do whatever you want to do. My parents told me I could do whatever, well, kind of, what I could do. So, but it's been very freeing. So actually when I was working with the Chicago company, I was also able to, even though I was living in Atlanta, I was traveling up there every other week and then working from home for her. But I did have some, believe it or not, some more time to be able to get involved with the community. And I found MedShare, which is a nonprofit here. At the time it was only about a year or a year and a half old. And it's a nonprofit that collects and redistributes surplus medical supplies. Founded by a great, actually two entrepreneurs, one a nonprofit guy, and then one a business person who had since retired. And MedShare, I may have said this, collects and redistributes surplus medical supplies, and they had met in the food bank industry and determined and found that there was the same excess in healthcare products as there is in the food industry. Someone had told AB about that. And so he and Bob Freeman, the co-founder, did quite a bit of research to find out if in fact such a need existed, if in fact there was that kind of excess, and if there was some organization that was already doing that. Because they believe what I believe, which is we don't need any more nonprofits necessarily in this world. We just need more good ones. And that if ones can merge, or someone who really wants to help can go help one that already exists, we're probably going to be better off. But what they found was that there were a few organizations doing, trying to meet the need, but not doing it very well, and none that were far enough along that they could really help. There was one that they worked with a little bit. So they decided to start a nonprofit, MedShare. And along the way, one of the people that they interviewed is Bill Foege. And he had been head of the CDC for a while, and at the time was the medical advisor to a little foundation out west called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's a doctor who had spent time in Africa, so he had seen the need. And what he told them is, yes, the need exists, and the product that he was aware existed, but only undertake this if you can ship what the recipients need and can use. Because all too often people ship things that aren't, that they can't use. And the example that I had heard on the news, actually not related to medical supplies, but when one of those hurricanes was down in Florida, some people from up north sent coats, parkas down to people in Florida. just sort of collecting what was in their attic and sending it. And that's what happens a lot with overseas. Or that they ship a piece of equipment that they don't have the consumables or the spare parts to be able to make it work. So they set about to put together a model that would work for recipients to be able to order what they needed. And that was the beginning of the MedShare model. Now the organization has about 1,200 volunteers a month that come and sort the product. So when it goes into inventory, it is in discrete boxes, all product of the same type, and can go into inventory as a 2-inch 20 cc syringe. For example, a syringe that's used for insulin is totally different from one that's used for vaccinations. So it doesn't do any good for a health facility to get the wrong kind of syringe, and it's just everything is that way. So the product, MedShare, I can talk forever about MedShare. They collect the product from hospitals and also get donations of overstocks, out of stocks, overstocks, and redesigned products from corporations and distributors, and bring it to MedShare. Volunteers sort it, goes into inventory, as I was saying, into like product, and we have a data system now where it is uploaded every 3 hours. So somebody in Kenya or Guatemala or Haiti can go online and order the product within 3 hours of when it's gone into our inventory. But when I met AB in MedShare, it was much smaller. It was him who was running it, the entrepreneur, a fellow working out in the warehouse, and a secretary that was doing a little bit of everything. The warehouse did not have any racking in it. Everything was on pallets on the floor, and it was really just getting started. And AB himself said, "I love to start businesses, but a lot of the nuts and bolts I don't enjoy." So the practical partner, I really never planned it to be that way. I just, when I had free time, I'd go out there and help him, or he'd call me. And we ended up kind of being a team in terms of working on things together. He's just an amazing person who, his ego is so much in check, and he reaches out for help, is not afraid to say what he doesn't know, and engages other people. So I fairly early went on the board and really had two hats with MedShare. One was as a board member, which is the judge role, as I was talking with Barbara about, and then as the volunteer as more of an advocate role. And worked very hard with him to talk about which hat, and the board members, which hat I was wearing. When I joined the board, it was already a really strong board and continued to get stronger. It's really amazing that the MedShare had the kind of board you would expect a much bigger organization to have. I think the budget was like $400,000 when I joined the organization, and yet we had one of the top attorneys with King & Spalding on the board. We had the head of the School of Public Health at Emory on the board, one of the leading doctors in town, just a great group. And the reason is because the mission was so compelling, and AB as the leader was so compelling, that people wanted a board like that rather than something where you just sit and listen to a bunch of presentations. So we all got hooked. He got everybody hooked, or we all got hooked. And in fact, Glenn Reed, the attorney, said, AB has this wonderful skill of getting us to do a bunch of the work, and chuckles because we all love doing it. So I helped with some of the more management-oriented things of processes and whatever, but also strategic projects. So when we were looking at needing a new warehouse, is working with the staff, figuring out what characteristics we needed in a warehouse and helping go look at them and putting all that together. Things that a staff would normally do, but MedShare's staff was just too small. But also on the expansion, we had said for many years we wanted to perfect the model and then expand to other communities. And the trick was we had a process for evaluating how we were doing in perfecting the model so we didn't grow too soon. We knew we'd never be perfect, so perfect may be the wrong term, but that we didn't want to duplicate too many mistakes, and so we wanted to get it be on sound footing. So we worked on that, and then when we felt we were to the point that we could expand, is the whole process of expanding, where to go, how to go. One of the board members is from Accenture. They donated a tremendous amount of analytical time for us. So there were lots of strategic projects. It was so rewarding to be able, the projects are really, the questions are the same. I tell people that a for-profit business is just like a non-for-profit business is just like a for-profit business, or should be, in terms of governance, rigor, all good marketing, understanding your customer, the products that you offer, all those, how you go about expanding, developing new products, all that is the same. The only thing that's different is the revenue model and the whole development side of things and how dependent a nonprofit is on development. But other than that, it's really the same. So I loved working on it, and I was very attracted to MedShare because it dealt with real products. Service kinds of businesses have never really attracted me or fit me very well at all. So I ended up being doing a lot of pro bono work as well as board work with MedShare, and in many ways it's sort of part of my identity. It'll never leave. But that also is a chapter that is changing because about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, AB announced to the board that he felt that it was time for him to step aside, and that he always wanted to be a fan of MedShare, and if he could help, he would. But that it was, and he said he wasn't going to retire; he's going to do other things. But that as with so many businesses, when they're growing like that, it was time for a different kind of leader. And so I served on the selection committee for the new CEO, and am thrilled to say that we have a woman. That was not a criteria, but it just so happened that a woman, Meredith Rentz, is running the organization now. And the transition could not have gone better. Everyone was committed to it going well, but anytime an organization with a very strong culture, as MedShare has, transitions and loses its founder, there's a huge risk of things going awry. And I think it's really to the credit of everyone that it's gone so well. And Meredith she's bringing a lot of the reason I say that it's a change for me is that she's bringing the skills that I had provided. So I'm still very active in the I chair the nominating and governance committee for MedShare and help lead some of the support or donor trips to visit our recipients, which I love, obviously. But it's a different kind of role and a much smaller role. And I'm really ready for that change too. So I will always be connected, and it'll be in my heart. But I'm really, this sort of catches me at an opportune time of, I'm thinking about what the next chapter is. It will definitely be, and I'm working with some other small nonprofits and small entrepreneurial businesses, but I've realized that what really gets me going is where I feel like I'm impacting lives. And the challenge that I continue to have is giving up money and title for that and being comfortable with that identity. I know in my heart that it's the right thing to do, but it is a big change for a person that has a little bit of a competitive side to her. But I do know it's the right thing to do. The way that I stay involved, though, in the traditional business, which I'm very glad to be able to do, because I don't want to lose that completely, if nothing else, to have strong business skills, is I serve on the board of a small New York Stock Exchange company called Trex. I joined that board in 1998, so I've been on there for a while, and also chair their nominating and governance committee. Trex makes, hopefully you've heard of them, because we do quite a bit of advertising in shelter magazines like Architectural Digest, Southern Living, television ads, certainly doing more on the web now. And we make composite decking out of recycled grocery bags and other plastic film that's used in distribution, and sawdust from furniture manufacturing, so it's all ecological, that under heat and pressure makes planks that are used for decking. So it sounds like a sales pitch, but it's long-lasting, doesn't stain or fade, and has a wood texture to it. So much more practical. I can attest, I remember my old deck up in Wisconsin, I got this huge splinter, and also it was slick and went sliding and fell on it, a wood deck. And so I understand the advantages of Trex not even being on the board. But it's a great company. It too has grown dramatically. It was a startup by a creative entrepreneur that sold it to Mobil Oil, and then Mobil spun it out. We've had some hiccups with leadership, but now have a CEO that's very capable. But I think even through the ups and downs, it was fascinating learning experience. Sometimes extremely trying, but it's on very solid footing, doing very well now. It was interesting to me, though, serving on the board, to wear the other hat of that. When I had been in corporate strategy, I had related to our board, and now to be the board member and think how the staff is thinking, but also what my expectations are of them. So I think a theme through my career has been to really cherish and grow from being on opposite sides of the fence, walking in those shoes, getting a diversity of experiences, and really being able to knit it all together. And I think that's what makes it fun. And as Leo told me, my first boss, when we were flying to Dayton, I told him how much fun I was. This when I was a little old business planner, and how much fun I was having. And he said, well, if you get to the point where you don't enjoy getting out of bed in the morning for too many mornings, find something else to do. And that's sort of been my driving force. And fortunately, I have enjoyed doing what I have done most of my life. And I feel really, really blessed to have had the opportunities. And even some of the challenges, as I'm thinking back, there are other stories I haven't told about some of the things. It's all been fun, and after a while you can laugh about some of them. So that's my story. I think the biggest challenge that I've had from a career standpoint is figuring out what I'm going to do. Because when I was at Meade, there was one opportunity after another, and so the whole idea of marketing in I had a vision for what I wanted. That was a piece of it, and so I wanted multiple experiences, and was able to work with them on that. And so it just sort of followed a natural course. Then, I sort of had done that, and so when I was ready for another chapter in my life, it was, a bit of a loss. And then this whole issue of identity, because I wanted to take a more non-traditional route. And at times I would feel like when I see people that have gone on, climbed the corporate ladder or gone to another corporation, I feel like a failure for not doing that. And then when I say, but would I want to be in those shoes? I say no. And then I say, well, am I lazy? And I don't think that's it. It's just I'm marching to a different drummer now. So I don't think it's so much that I hit a wall as it's that identity thing of how I want to live my life. And I guess it's a constant kind of thing. My definition of work-life balance is different from a lot of women you've probably talked with, because I think the first thing that comes to mind is with a family. And as we're talking about earlier, that has not been an interest of mine, other than my niece and nephew, and that's very important. But for me, work-life balance is more defined as having the time to devote to the community. And early in my career, I was able to do that. But later in my career, I wasn't able to figure out a way to do that. And maybe because certainly I should have been able to create the time, because a lot of the executives that had the jobs I had a family and kids, so they carved out some time for them. But for whatever reason, I also tend to be a workaholic. I'm obviously much better at it now, but that's how I got my jollies. And so it was very easy for me to stay late hours and work, because it just felt good. So I think it's that balance more in terms of involvement in the community and giving back. This sounds terrible, but I didn't have personal goals. I mean, other than physical exercise. So I was actually more disciplined about working out when I had this horrific schedule than I am now. But I was very disciplined about working out, and just running and working out at the gym. I would regularly, if I couldn't. The athletic club used to close at 8, so if I couldn't get in by 7, then I'd go in early in the morning before work. So that was really my primary personal goal, and everything else was pretty much work.
Have that strong work ethic. Paper industry probably more male dominated.
Oh, yeah.
So, did any women choose to leave or off ramp and then have trouble coming back in at any point, or were there? I mean, I know you were one of the first in that industry.
I will say one thing, by the way, about being the only woman in an industry. If you're at an industry meeting and they take a break, you have the whole bathroom to yourself. It's because there are not any women there. Yeah. I cannot think of any women, not just in the paper industry, but in other of friends that have left and come back into the same industry. My friends tend to either be super moms that, by having a supportive husband and a nanny, are able to do it all, or people that have either cut back significantly or taken some time off, and then when they've come back, wanted to do something completely different. And I'm wondering if there's, just thinking now about something that gets in your blood, some kind of endorphin when you're in the corporate world, that if you're away from it for a while, you're more able to sit back and think about more broadly about what you want to do. I'm not quite sure how to define that, but I just have not seen people want to get back into the same thing. Well, I know it happens, but I just haven't seen it.
It's interesting, and this is my daughter has a 3-week-old baby now, and she's in the pharmaceutical industry, and that has certainly changed, because she's very competitive, makes the numbers and all that.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of like, do I want to go back into that and pursue that as hard as I did?
You know, something else that, along the lines of work-life balance is I think men have that same challenge. And where women have a right to complain about the challenge of all that, and still in most cases the predominance of the children's care rests on moms, although that's changing more and more. I know stay-at-home dads are super active dads. But the whole idea of being able to change careers is something I think most people, when they get into their 40s and 50s, start thinking back on their career, saying, is this what I really want to be doing for the rest of my life? And that many people, and more so men than women, feel that they have to stick with what they're doing, that they can't sacrifice income, that they're the primary breadwinner, or at least the men that I've run into, I don't think feel the flexibility that women I've run into feel. So I think that to balance some of the other challenges that we have to deal with, I think that that's one of the, and there are a lot of benefits that we get, you know. So, but I think that's one of them.
I agree. You know, it's kind of like those golden handcuffs.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So much. How do you walk away?
Exactly.
Am I providing for my family? Question relative: do you think other women help women? What's your experience with that?
The quick answer is I don't know. I think that women try to mentor, and the reason I'm pausing is I'm thinking about myself and simultaneously about women in general. Maybe the best way to answer that question is start with myself. I have felt that I have strong feelings about minorities and helping minorities and women, and I've in some ways have felt more able to advocate for minorities because it looks like I'm not advocating for myself. And I'm sure many of my feminist friends would have apoplexy at my saying that, but it is a challenge, and I think I've looked for people with capabilities and tried to mentor them, no matter what color or gender that they are. So I think that gets the quick answer to your question is some, but not focused on women.
Sometimes you find being the only woman that in a position, then the women who hold those leadership positions sometimes don't help the women coming up because they perceive them as competition. So
I've never run into that. I have. I've never. Well, my philosophy is you always try to hire people that are better than you are, because you'll be just a heck of a lot better off for lots of reasons. So that jealousy kind of thing has never gotten in the way. I will say, this is, I guess, more of an anecdote, sort of tangential to what you're saying, but is when I went to run the machinery division, the woman that was the assistant to the plant manager, and I always said she ran the place and let us get the title and the salary, but she knew everything that was going on and how things worked, and you definitely needed Edna on your side. And when I came in, I'd only been there like a week or two, and she came in to see me and oh no, it'd been longer than that, maybe a month. And she said, I worked for a woman once before and we didn't get along at all, so I wasn't very excited about you coming, but I've promised your predecessor that I would try to help you be successful. And so I just want you to know it's going to be hard for me, but I'm committed to trying to help you. And then she went on to tell me something I was doing that was offending someone that I didn't even realize I was doing. So she was really sort of being a behind-the-scenes helper. But that really surprised me, because I'd never heard about people a woman not wanting to work for a woman. But I guess that's happened.
Yeah, I unfortunately heard other women say they'd rather.
I think I've worked with so few women that I've just never had an opportunity. I've worked almost entirely with men, and so I just haven't seen it.
What?
I think hugely, and well, I'm jumping to the answer, but at the same time, I don't want to sound like that parent that says, I walked 6 miles to school in the snow, you know. But when I still teach at the Darden School, I go up twice a year and teach a class there on MedShare, actually. And they'll often ask questions at the end about, experiences being a woman in the industry. And when I tell them some of the stories of things that have happened to me, they just can't believe it. So I think in terms of being accepted, it's much easier. And I do think in terms of technology, and companies are getting much more flexible. When we were starting out our careers, I mentioned that I turned down a job opportunity with the corporation. I was red circled for probably about 3 or 4 years for having turned that job down. And I thought that actually, Dick was asking about hitting a wall. I thought for a while I might have really done myself in. And had I turned down a second move, I definitely would have done myself in. But it took me a little while to get out of the penalty box. And I think now, I was talking to a woman that works in a very conservative corporation, and she was saying, when we hire somebody, they tell us where they want to live. And that wasn't on the agenda earlier on. So I think corporations are more attuned to the needs of employees than they used to be.